Okay, yeah, thanks, Chris. That's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about managing the fire service training program. And we're going to dive into exactly what it takes to manage that fire service training program. And then we're going to give a little bit of focus at the end of this on instructor development, what it takes to develop your fire instructors. So let's go ahead and get started. So, managing the fire service training program, how many times have you gone to the firehouse and heard the term, "What are we doing for drill tonight?" So if you are hearing that term when you go to the firehouse, especially on a regular basis, you're probably not operating under a properly managed fire service training program. Adults are need to know learners. They need to understand exactly what's going on, and they need to know their expectations before we put them into a situation and expect something of them. So what we always want to do is we always want to prepare our adult learner prior to the training that we're going to be giving them. Okay, so managing the fire service training program is one of the most time-consuming tasks there is in the fire service. There is a lot to do. Outside of the fire chief, probably the training officer has the most responsibility. So it's not uncommon for a training officer to get way in over their head or get behind quickly, and then you get into these situations where people are showing up not knowing exactly what they're doing for drill. But we can solve that when we understand how to manage the fire service training program properly. So let's just take a look at some of the stuff the training officer has to do, some of the responsibilities of the training officer. Okay, they got to identify the requirements, a little bit what we're going to talk about today. They got to identify the skill level of the firefighters that they're going to be teaching. They have to develop a process to assess that skill. They got to figure out what kind of skills they're working with already and what kind of skills they need to develop. They got to identify what training is needed outside of those requirements, and they got to develop a plan to meet those requirements. And then they're going to develop a schedule of training sessions that delivers that training. They got to develop lessons for each session that they're going to deliver, and a presentation needs to be built for each lesson that is going to be delivered. Not to mention, we need to deliver each training session to a captive audience, which can be challenging all on its own. And then we got to record that training session and maintain those records. So this is just a little bit of what the training officer is responsible for. And as you can see, it's quite an extensive list. There was a lot to being the training officer. There was a lot to managing the fire service training program. So how do we do that? How do we eat that elephant one bite at a time, right? So we eat that elephant one bite at a time. And the best way to do that is to break it up into little steps. So we break it up into 5 different steps that help us manage little parts or little bits of the fire service training program so we can accomplish the entire task in little bites. And those 5 steps are: first, we perform a needs assessment. We find out what training the fire department actually needs. Where does the fire department need to be spending their time and spending their energy developing training for their membership? Once we understand the needs, we're going to develop a program to meet those needs. And that program is going to deliver that needs assessment in a logical operation that we call program operations. So we're going to operate that program through a specific methodology that allows us to present that needed training to the membership themselves. And just like we need to evaluate the skills of our firefighters, we also need to perform a evaluation of the program itself to make sure that the program is actually working and it's delivering the message that we're trying to get out to our membership. Okay, and then we got to retain those records. We have to record everything that we do and keep those records on file. This all starts with a needs assessment, and that needs assessment can be broken up into 2 separate categories: internal and external. We'll start out with that external requirement. So by external, we mean these are training requirements that come to us from outside of the organization itself. These are typically things that come to us through laws, either federal, state, or local, okay? And these are the things that require specific types of training. Fire departments are considered employers, okay? And most states, in fact, all states, have certain laws about employee training requirements. Now, these training requirements are beyond that of firefighting operations, okay? These are the things that the employer must be training their people in, such as Article 26, or the right to know. And what the right to know is it's a law that states that every person who works for an employer must be told by the employer what hazardous materials that they might come in contact while operating as an employee of that organization. So that's what we're talking about with external type requirements. There's also standards So standards come to us in typically two different ways. So we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and their standard or regulation is called the Fire Brigade standard, and it's 1910-156, CFR 29, 1910-156. And that's basically a set of laws, or set of regulations, excuse me, not necessarily a law, that's put forth by Congress, the United States Congress, that states what firefighters need to be trained in if they're going to be operating in the form of a fire brigade. And now OSHA depends on how your state is set up as to what the actual requirement is. Some states are OSHA states where they have OSHA approved plans, and then other states are federal OSHA requirements. It all depends on the state that you're in. But what isn't different for any of the 50 states is the nationally accepted professional standard for firefighter is NFPA 1001. And that's the National Fire Protection Association. And they create professional standards. And what happens is a committee of people gets together and says, oh, you know what? A firefighter needs to understand this much knowledge and have this much skill to be able to do a certain job. And they break 1001 down into firefighter 1 and firefighter 2. And there's different forms of job performance requirements and skills and knowledge that the firefighter needs to have depending on whether they fit into that level 1 or that level 2 firefighter. And then there's mandates. Mandates is the government's way of closing gaps where things are needed that they don't have a law written for yet. And in most of these states, you'll find that these are like your harassment training. So maybe your sexual harassment training or workplace violence, things of that nature. Okay, it's mandated training. The employer is mandated to provide each employee with that training. Next is our internal needs. Okay, and our internal needs come from the organization itself. We can find them right inside the organization. But that OSHA standard, 1910-156, the fire brigade standard, is going to tell us exactly how to find those organizational needs. How do we figure out exactly what training we need? It basically comes from an organizational statement. And that organizational statement basically says who you are, how many members you have, what is your leadership hierarchy, how do you operate, okay? What do you do? What functions do you perform as an organization, and what services do you provide? What basically is your operation, and how do you prepare for that operation? What type of training do you do? What is the frequency of that training that you perform? And what is the amount of training that you require for each one of your members? So we find our internal needs through that organizational statement. And while building that organizational statement, we're starting to understand exactly what our training program is going to look like when it's finished. So if we are a structural firefighting organization, which is the majority of fire departments across the country, we need to train our firefighters commensurate to their duties of structural firefighting. So what does that mean? Well, that means that firefighters must be trained in suppression. So they must know how to operate hoses, how to put old hoses into service. So that's how to stretch, advance, and operate hoses, including selection of water stream, where to apply the water, how to apply the water, what the difference is between direct attack and indirect attack, and so on and so forth, how much water it takes to defeat a fire. It probably also means it needs some tactical ventilation training, okay? Tactical ventilation training is going to tell the firefighter, all right, that ventilation is actually the introduction of fresh air into a compartment while exhausting the bad air, and we need to do that in a certain way so that it doesn't make situations worse and doesn't hamper the efforts of the firefighters inside. We also have to teach them how to perform rescue, how to search for victims, how to remove victims, how to operate ground ladders, how to carry ground ladders, throw ground ladders, climb ground ladders, so on and so forth. If our fire department responds to motor vehicle accidents, that means that we need to train our firefighters in motor vehicle extrication. That means training them commensurate to the skills that they're going to need to perform that operation, including how to safely operate and handle each one of those tools. Same goes for hazardous materials, and this depends on what level of hazardous materials response our organization is performing. Are we an awareness level organization where if we respond to a scene and say, oh yes, that's a hazardous material, I need to call somebody in to take care of that? Or more than likely, your organization is an operational level response organization where you get to a motor vehicle accident and see there's some fluid spilled. You identify that fluid as a potential hazardous material, maybe it's a radiator fluid or some oil, and you take speedy dry and clean up that spill. Or maybe you're an actual technical operations department where your firefighters are trained to put on Class B and A suits and go into an IDLH of an ammonia nitrate leak. Okay, so it all depends on what level of response that you intend to go to is where you need to be trained to. The same holds true for water rescue and any technical rescue for that matter. Okay, if you're going to respond to water rescue calls, then your firefighters need to be trained commensurate to the duties required for water rescue. Now, what's important here is that you understand if you have a river that flows through your fire district, that does not necessarily mean you need to train your firefighters in water rescue. It is when you decide that as an organization you are going to respond to emergencies on that waterfront or rescue people who are in that river, then you need to be trained commensurate to that duty of water rescue operation. And if you have a river flowing directly through your fire district that is heavily populated, I suggest you do train your firefighters in that response. And as an organization, it's one of the things that you do respond to because inevitably an emergency is going to happen. And one thing firefighters are really bad at is standing around and doing nothing while somebody is in trouble. So it's best to say that you're going to do it and then train your firefighters to that level that they need to be. The same would hold true for hazardous material, or excuse me, rapid intervention crew here. Okay, so if you respond to your own fire department or maybe a neighboring fire department as a rapid intervention crew, the firefighters need to be trained commensurate to the duties of the rapid intervention crew. And that includes all the tools and operations that may be performed during a rapid extrication of a firefighter. And the same would hold true if you have a marine unit. If you have a fireboat, then the training needs to happen on the fireboat just the same it would train on a land-based engine company. Okay, so that's exactly what we need to do. We need to identify everything that we do and then train our firefighters commensurate to the duties of performing those operations. So that's our needs assessment. That's exactly how we should approach our needs assessment by breaking it down into those three little parts and then looking at each one individually. And then what we have to do is move on to program development. So now this is where we're going to develop that program that's going to be based on the needs requirements that we identified during that needs assessment. So this is where we put together some training of those requirements and deliver it to our membership. Okay, so program development. So we identified that training. We identified what we needed to do with that training, or excuse me, we identified what we need to do as an organization, and then we identified training that we need to have to do that need. Now what we're going to do is we're going to break those down into individual job descriptions. So we're going to take a job description and develop these based on the needs of the organizational statement. So we look at our organizational statement, and we're a structural fire department, so we need firefighters who are going to go into a burning building, carry a hose, put water on the fire. We also need firefighters who are going to go into the building and search for victims, search for fire and victims. And we also need firefighters who are going to carry ladders onto the fire ground, climb onto the roof, cut holes in the roof, so on and so forth. Each one of these is a job description. That job description has individual needs of itself, okay? So we develop a job description for each position. Maybe you have members who only are at the support level. They only fill air bottles, supply firefighters with water and rehab type activities. We build a job description for each different title of operation, and then we train those firefighters based on those job requirements, okay? So the job descriptions, each one of them will have a job performance requirement. And these job performance requirements are the skills needed for a specific type of a job, all right? So, and we group these always according to tactic and task. Okay? So if our interior firefighter, we'll go back to the ladder, needs to understand how to carry, throw, and climb a ladder. Okay? So that's a job performance requirement. That JPR was what we call them, means that the firefighter, we have to be able to check off the firefighter's skill ability on carrying, throwing, or raising, and then climbing ground ladders. Okay? That would be one specific job performance requirement for the job description of interior firefighter. Okay, these are what's going to define the skill that each firefighter must be capable of doing to perform their duties. This is how we judge or evaluate competency. We have a list of skills, and then those skills are broken down into little steps that they have to do of each skill to show that they have competence in the actual skill we're asking them to perform. Okay, and we base those skills again on NFPA 1001. And NFPA 1001 identifies knowledge and skill ability needed for firefighter 1 and firefighter 2. So then we develop some curriculum and we need to develop some lessons to deliver that knowledge and skill for each JPR. So if we go back to our ladder example, we would develop a lesson that teaches the firefighter what the parts of the ladder are called, how the ladder is constructed, how the ladder operates. We would show them a demonstration of how the ladder is put up properly and a presentation how to climb the ladder. And then we would also develop a lesson that went out and coach them on how to do each one of those things as a psychomotor skill. Okay, so that means we've got to develop some delivery methods to present each one of these lessons. And we break those delivery methods down based on if it's a knowledge or skill requirement. Okay, so delivery methods that we're all used to when we talk about training and drilling. Oftentimes we use these two words as the same, training and drilling, but they are not. They're completely different things. Training is a formal method of presenting a new skill. So we're introducing a new skill or knowledge in a training session. So I sit the firefighter down and through a formal method show them this new knowledge or skill and show them what it looks like. Drilling, on the other hand, is when we actually take them out onto the training ground and we have them practice that skill. So they're actually putting their hands on. So in training, there is no hands on. It's a cognitive function. And when we get out on the drilling grounds, that's where we apply the skill and we do psychomotor work. So two separate things, training and drilling. So with our training, that's usually going to be a lecture or a discussion, some type of a presentation, maybe even a demonstration or a video. So in our formal training, we're going to use these things independently to show what right looks like. Now, the delivery methods for lecture or discussion, they're instructor-led. So the instructor stands in front of the class and goes through the presentation explaining each one of these steps. We're typically using a PowerPoint here, and we most often use these PowerPoints to deliver some form of knowledge, okay? The demonstration, that's where we show the skill. We show what right looks like. We show exactly what performing the skill properly looks like so that they have a good idea of what that is. Okay, so moving on, now once we've practiced that skill, we do a skill drill where we allow them to keep practicing and develop their skills. And once they've developed their skills, we're going to apply that skill in an evolution or a scenario. So skill drills the practice of that specific skill, and that's where the fire instructor is coaching, helping the student along, helping them develop the skill required. This is where we're out practicing that ladder throw, practicing climbing, using 3 points of contact, so on and so forth, okay? And what we're trying to do is develop muscle memory as we drill the skill. So we want the firefighters with these skills to be able to do these skills without thinking about it. We want their minds not to be on performance of the skill, but we want their minds to be on the situation and have situational awareness as to what's going on around them, so that they don't have to focus on performing the skill. They can perform the skill while their focus is on the dangers or the hazards that they're performing the skill in that environment. Okay, and then the evolution, that's where we apply that new knowledge or skill. So we do some form of a thing. So let's, with our ladder example that we keep using, our ladder example would be, we've practiced the ladder, we've practiced the throwing of the ladder, we've practiced the climbing of the ladder. Now we're going to do an evolution. And the evolution is going to be event enter search from the second floor. So it's much more than just throwing a ladder here. We're just going to take the skill of throwing a ladder and apply it to a larger evolution where we're going to put it up to a building, climb the ladder, enter a window, search, and then exit the window, come back down the ladder. So we're applying that in a live scenario-based operation in a controlled environment. So once we've developed our program, figured out the skills, what skills we're going to have to teach, we now got to develop a program to operate through some form of methodology, some way that we can get this across to our firefighters in a logical method or manner. Okay, so what we use at Vigilant, our program methodology is something we call proficiency cycle training. The cycle builds competency by doing one step at a time and repeating that process over time. Okay, and it'll always start with training, so some formal training session where we show you what that skill is and teach you about the skill, and it will end with mastery. And we stay in the cycle until mastery is achieved. And again, mastery in this case means that we can perform the skill correctly with muscle memory. So this process always starts out with training. That's where we sit and have our formal introduction of that new concept or skill. All right, it's a formal presentation, typically using a PowerPoint or some form of demonstration. We then drill on that skill where we're out there practicing the skill. So now we completely repeat this over and over and over again through good coaching and good practicing skills to develop that skill into something that starts to develop that muscle memory. And we use a 5-step psychomotor process, which is something we'll talk about in a couple of webinars from now. But we use a 5-step process there too to introduce the skill and have them completely comprehend the skill that we're trying to teach. Once they've practiced the skill, they've got the skill pretty well down. We apply it in an evolution. As that evolution is going on, also, we're evaluating that evolution. So we're evaluating that skill while they are performing it. And depending on how that evaluation goes, is whether or not we move on or we start to retrain. But anyways, through that evaluation, we've developed remediation training. So let's say that maybe during our evaluation, we found that the firefighter was putting the ladder upside down. Well, we've identified that there's a problem with the firefighter's understanding of the butt end from the tip of the ladder. So we remediate some training. We develop training, complete the proficiency cycle, go back to drilling, apply it again, evaluate it again, and then remediate it. And this completes the loop, and we develop mastery by just completely maintaining that loop over and over again through training, drilling, evolution, evaluation, and remediation. So we take all of our requirements, all of our lessons that we've developed with the understanding that we're going to train, we're going to drill, we're going to perform or apply it in an evolution, and we develop an annual training plan. And that training plan basically uses that proficiency cycle to deliver the curriculum that we've developed through the needs that we've identified. And that plan is going to use a logical sequence to deliver all of this training into little manageable blocks. Just like we're trying to manage the fire service training program into small blocks, small chunks, we're going to deliver that training program to the firefighters in those small chunks as well. Okay, and that might be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, depending on the training that we're developing. Right. So we talked about we want to be able to train our firefighters in PPE and SCBA weekly, but maybe we only have to show them how to dike a hazardous material spill on an annual basis. Okay, so it all depends on that skill and that knowledge, what we're talking about, whether we need to repeat that training weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly. So we take all of our requirements, all of our lessons that we've developed with the understanding that we're going to train, we're going to drill, we're going to perform or apply it in an evolution, and we develop an annual training plan. And that training plan basically uses a proficiency cycle to deliver the curriculum that we've developed through the needs that we've identified. And that plan is going to use a logical sequence to deliver all of this training into little manageable blocks. Just like we're trying to manage the fire service training program into small blocks, small chunks, we're going to deliver that training program to the firefighters in those small chunks as well. Okay, and that might be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, depending on the training that we're developing. Right. So we talked about we want to be able to train our firefighters in PPE and SCBA weekly, but maybe we only have to show them how to dike a hazardous material spill on an annual basis. Okay, so it all depends on that skill and that knowledge, what we're talking about, whether we need to repeat that training weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Go. So we need to also know and understand how our program is operating. So we've built our program, we're operating that program, maybe it's been up and running for maybe a year, and we need to understand now, is that program working? Is the training we're getting out to our firefighters working? Are they retaining what we're trying to teach? The only way to do that is through a program evaluation. We have to evaluate the program just like we evaluate the firefighter. Okay, so program evaluation. We have to evaluate our program in the same manner that we evaluate the knowledge and skills of our firefighters. Okay, it's important that we understand exactly how our program is operating, because the leadership has to have a good understanding of how effective the program is in delivering that skill and knowledge ability, or knowledge and skill ability, excuse me, to our firefighters. Okay, so if we're responding to several fire scenes and we find that the firefighters are placing ground ladders upside down, is it a firefighter problem or is it a training problem? Okay, and if we're seeing this through multiple companies, multiple firefighters, chances are it's not going to be the individual firefighter that's having a problem. It's probably going to be the program that's having more of an issue. So it's very important that we evaluate the actual training program itself. And when I say evaluate, what I'm talking about is a full evaluation of the entire curriculum. And that's going to include lessons. So each lesson plan is going to be evaluated over time. All right, and the presentations that that present those lessons are also going to be evaluated, as well as the instructors themselves. Okay, it's important that we are evaluating our instructors to make sure that the instructors are being as effective as they can be. Okay, it doesn't make any sense to have a fire instructor who is well knowledged in rope rescue and technical operations teaching hazmat when he doesn't have much of an understanding of anything beyond the awareness level of hazardous materials. That firefighter, his instruction expertise, so to speak, is in the technical rescue aspect. So he should be teaching rope stuff, while our firefighters who are more knowledge and have a better expert knowledge ability in hazardous materials, they're the ones that should be teaching our hazmat. And we can manage this through pre and post testing. And what I mean by that, pre and post testing, is not exactly giving our firefighters 100-question test, so to speak, or a multi-choice question before and after every training session. There are multiple things out there today where we can make testing a game for the firefighter, where they don't even understand that they're being tested, but that test still provides us with an evaluation of the program. There's many online quiz-based or online-based quiz development programs that we can be using. Kahoot is one of them, and there are several others where we can go online, build a quiz, and the firefighters are competing against each other to get the best answer the quickest. Okay, and what in reality is happening is we're understanding what their knowledge ability is, and has it changed since the last time we taught them a lesson. So that evaluation is going to give us a good idea of our instructor development as well. And just as we want to build that muscle memory in our firefighters, we want to build the ability in our fire instructors to be able to deliver that knowledge and skill ability to the firefighters. It is a challenge to actually teach some of these knowledge and skill abilities, especially when you're operating in front of your peers. Okay, but how do we develop that instructor? How do we take a firefighter, maybe a senior level firefighter, who has a good solid core knowledge base? Maybe they're an expert in certain fields. How do we get that knowledge out to the rest of the department? Well, that's through instructor development. Okay, and first off, fire instructors have to be approved by the AHJ, or authority having jurisdiction. So in any case, that's going to be whoever is in charge of the actual fire department itself. So if it's a village-run fire department, then the AHJ is the village board. Okay, if it's a fire district, then that is the Board of Fire Commissioners who operate that district. So it depends on whether you're a municipality, a private fire company, or a special district type operation. But whoever is in charge, the overall person who's in charge, or people or board that's in charge, whoever sets the policies and procedures, are in charge of approving fire instructors. So that fire instructor, to be approved, all they have to really honestly do is meet the requirements of the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. Okay, but at the very least, they should have an expert topic knowledge. So whatever they're going to be teaching, they should be an expert in that topic. Again, using the hazmat example, we're not going to have somebody who only has awareness level hazardous materials teach an operations level course. It just doesn't make sense. And we're not going to have a good production of that time used to teach that actual course. Okay. The other thing is, fire instructors must be comfortable presenting in front of their peers. Oftentimes it's harder to present in front of our peers than it is to present in front of do a public speaking announcement in front of people you've never met before. Okay, so that threshold to teach in front of people who we know and who we're comfortable around sometimes is a lot harder, because we might in a crowd where nobody knows us, nobody's going to open their their mouths and start harassing us. But in a group of our peers, if we say something wrong, we're going to get harassed by our peers very quickly. So that's why it's important that they are both comfortable with presenting that material and they're an expert in that knowledge so that they're not stating things that are wrong. Now, on a professional side, all professional development of fire instructors is based on NFPA 1041. So that's the standard for professional development of fire instructors. That basically, what that standard says is that a level 1 fire instructor is capable of delivering training from a lesson plan. So it's a formal course that you take. It's called Fire Instructor 1, and you would take this level 1 course, and you would learn the JPRs, like we talked about earlier, job performance requirements, of delivering a training operation or a training presentation, excuse me, from an actual lesson plan. A little bit more training, we go up to the level 2 fire instructor, and the level 2 fire instructor can write a lesson plan, okay? So they take another course or an advancement of the level 1 course, and they learn the JPRs and the knowledge and skill ability to actually write the lesson plan. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we went over all the different parts of a lesson plan, and that's exactly what they'll be learning about when they're taking these courses. How to write the actual lesson plan with the cover sheet, with the preparation, presentation, application, evaluation, summary. Everything that we've talked about here in the past. Now at the level 3 course, these fire instructors, they can actually manage an entire program. And there's very few states across the country who actually, I don't want to say acknowledge the level 3 fire instructor, but there's very few states who offer level 3 fire instructor training to their everyday students out of their state fire academy. Most of your level 3 fire instructor courses are going to be from some form of a state college. Okay. Now, continuing on, at minimum, every fire instructor must have formal training in the following topics. And we've stated these before, okay? That's preparation. So our fire instructors have to understand how to both prepare the lesson and prepare the audience to learn. Preparing the lesson means that they're going through the lesson, they're understanding the content, they're understanding the goal of the actual training, they know what the objectives are, and they know what they have to do to accomplish those objectives as part of this course that they're delivering. And once they prepared for the course and delivery night comes along, now they've got to prepare the student to learn as well. So those are two completely separate types of preparation, but both are critically important because if the student's not ready to learn, if they're not prepared to learn, maybe the last thing they did was just left their job in a volunteer organization. Maybe they just came from their job where they got in trouble for breaking 6 widgets during the day, and that's what's on their mind. If we're not taking the student and releasing them from their whatever they were doing prior to coming to class, all right, if we're not taking care of releasing them from that, we can't prepare them to learn and understand what we're about to present to them. So preparation becomes critically important. The next step is presentation. How do you present the lesson? Okay, you can't just get up and start droning off in a single monotone voice and expect people to understand and take in the knowledge that you're trying to put out. So how are we going to present this lesson? Are we going to use videos? What's the interactive level going to be with our audience? Are we just going to stand in front of the audience and lecture? That normally doesn't go well when we're talking about adult learning, especially in the fire service. The next step is application. So how do we apply? How do we go ahead and now we've taught how to stretch this hose line. We've told you why we do it the way that we do it. We told you how it actually operates, but now we have to apply it. We have to get out onto the street, onto the training ground, and take the hose from the truck, stretch it, prepare it at the door, charge it, go through, get it to the second floor, so on and so forth. How do we apply that lesson that we're trying to teach now? So they have to have some formal training in that. There's a lot of safety that becomes involved with this training, okay? And there's a lot of responsibility that comes down on the fire instructor. Anyone who's ever hurt in training, it's the ultimate responsibility of the lead instructor of the course where the person was hurt, okay? The goal here is 0 injury in training. And we can only have 0 injury in training if we understand the application of these lessons and courses. And then evaluation. How do we evaluate, okay? Most evaluations need to be objective as opposed to subjective. Subjective meaning I don't think you did it right, but I don't think you did it right is my opinion. What I need to have is I need to have some evaluation that says exactly where you messed up or where you didn't do something quite right. And that usually falls back on those job performance requirements, the JPRs that we were talking about in previous lessons. Okay, and then a summary. How do we summarize the entire lesson, or how do we summarize that activity that we just did, so that the firefighter, the last thing they go away with is how to do the thing right, or the last thing they go away with is understanding that knowledge that we are trying to get across to them. Okay, so at a minimum, fire instructors obviously have to have that minimum training uh, what we just mentioned. But another part that we need to really get them to understand is that 5-step psychomotor skill delivery. And we talked about this several weeks ago, and I reviewed it again last week, or excuse me, the week before. And that's that 5-step process where, as the instructor, I just show the student exactly what right looks like. I show them at full speed without verbalizing anything. Then the next thing that I do is I do it at half speed, telling them what each one of those steps is. And then the next thing I do it at half speed again, but this time the student is going to tell them, or tell me, excuse me, exactly what steps I need to do. And then finally, in that next step, we get the student to actually touch the skill for the first time. They're going to go at half speed while they explain each step that they're doing. And then finally, that fifth and final step is they're going to practice until they create that muscle memory and that mastery in that skill. So we really need to have our firefighters understand each one of those individual steps. And not only understanding those steps, but having the ability to coach our firefighters through those steps, okay? And coaching is a whole thing that's unique on its own. Coaching requires a lot of patience, okay? So patience is a virtue for a fire instructor. Absolutely 100%. Wow. So we've evaluated our program. Now we got to retain our records, okay? Record retention, real important part of the managing a fire training program. It's important because unrecorded training did not happen, right? So we have to record every single training session. So we have to make an individual training report that goes along with every training session. It identifies what our objectives were, what training we covered, how did we cover it, was it a presentation, was it a skill drill, was it an evolution, and then who was at the training session. We have to give an attendance for each individual member that was at that training session. And then the individual members must also have their own permanent records kept, and we want to keep all of their training completions as well. So we want to keep a record of their initial training, any annual training that they've completed, any training that they've completed outside of the fire department itself. Maybe they went to a seminar or attended a state fire academy course. We want to be able to keep individual records just like we keep records of all of the individual sessions. Very, very, very important. Because when the records are called upon, they got to be there on hand to be able to prove the training that the firefighter and the fire department did. And this is going to help out in litigation cases. So all training records, they must be maintained and destroyed according to your own state regulations. So every state has their own schedule for record retention, and they keep a schedule of how to maintain that record as well as how to destroy that record once the repository period is over. So that's another important part, and that will also be one of our webinar coming up here in the future, is how to perform proper record retention for our fire service training program. Okay, so just let's close up on everything we talked about, wrap it up, bring it back together. Remember, we start out this entire management process with a needs assessment. We got to identify those internal and external needs. What training requirements does this fire department organization need to do on an annual basis? We then develop a program that's going to meet those needs, that's based on the job descriptions and the job performance requirements of the firefighters who are operating for us, dependent to the job or the service that we are providing. We then operate a program that uses a methodology called proficiency cycle training to deliver all of our curriculum in a logical method. Then we evaluate our program to make sure that the program is getting out to the membership exactly what we want to get out, and that our firefighters are developing in their skill and they're growing in their knowledge. And we retain all the records as far as each training session goes, and individual records for our individual members. Okay, so that's it in a shot, and that's going to wrap it up this week. I will turn it over to Chris for any questions. I thank you for being with us again for another week of our webinar on fire service training management, and I hope to see you guys all again next week. Thanks a lot.